She was introduced as a famous French chef. The truth was very different from what the CEO had planned. Before starting the story, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from? And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Have a great story, everyone. The executive chef of the Walker Grand Hotel walked out the service door at 10 in the morning with a small suitcase, an envelope full of cash in his pocket, and the conscience of a man who had made a very bad decision and wasn't the least bit sorry. Liam Walker stared at the closed door for 3 full seconds. Then he turned to the 22 kitchen staff members who were staring back at him in silence. "Dinner is at 7, he said, as if that solved anything. It didn't. What followed was an unlikely combination of shouting, pots banging against surfaces that pots shouldn't bang against, and at least 2 sous chefs arguing in different languages at the same time. Steam rose from the stoves as if the kitchen itself were exhaling frustration. The fine drizzle outside tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, indifferent to the internal collapse of Boston's most elegant hotel. Liam Walker was 34 years old, had a hotel empire inherited from his father, and exactly 0 ideas about what to do next. He was a millionaire CEO. He managed multi-million-dollar contracts. He negotiated with investors without blinking. But no business school teaches what to do when your executive chef abandons the kitchen 6 hours before the most important dinner of your career. Mia Whitmore parked her food truck at the Walker Grand service entrance at 10:20 with 12 sourdough loaves, a bunch of fresh thyme, and the very clear plan of spending the next 15 minutes delivering everything, signing the receipt, and leaving before the drizzle got worse. She carried the boxes down the service corridor, humming softly. She pushed the kitchen door open with her elbow. She stopped. She took in the chaos in front of her. 1 sous chef was sitting on the floor holding his head. Another was trying to call someone and failing. 3 people were shouting in different directions. A frying pan had been abandoned on the stove with something inside that was beyond saving. Mia set the boxes down on the first empty counter she found. "Does anyone want to sign the receipt?" she asked. Nobody answered. They didn't even glance her way. She took the frying pan off the heat herself, turned off the gas, and left to get her clipboard from the truck. When she returned, there was a man in a suit standing in the middle of the kitchen with the posture of someone used to solving problems and the expression of someone who had found the only problem he couldn't solve. "Are you part of the brigade?" he asked, focusing on her with the intensity of someone who urgently needed the answer to be yes. "I'm delivery," Mia said. "The bread is on the back counter." He stared at her for 2 seconds. "Do you know how to cook?" "I have a food truck." "Is that a yes?" "That's a different answer than the one you want to hear." Liam Walker ran a hand through his hair, surveyed the panicked staff around them, and then turned back to her. "My chef just walked out. The most important dinner of the year is at 7. I have an investor flying in from New York who might finance the expansion of the entire chain." He let a pause hang in the air that wasn't quite a pause. It was the kind of silence that precedes a proposal the person already knows is slightly absurd. "How much do you charge for a day's work?" Mia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You don't even know my name." He hesitated. It was visible, a millisecond of hesitation that revealed that no, in fact, he hadn't asked. Mia felt that land somewhere in her chest, not with anger exactly, with the quiet recognition of someone who had been in this position before, the useful person at the right time, with no name, no history, just a temporary solution with available hands. She said, "My name is Mia Whitmore, Liam Walker." He held out his hand. She glanced at it. Then she shook it. "How much do you want, Mia?" That was the moment Winston appeared. No one could explain later how the duck had made his way out of the 3rd-floor office, waddled down 2 flights of stairs, and crossed the service corridor without anyone noticing. The fact is that the kitchen entrance door swung open with a push of wings, and Winston, a mandarin duck with orange and blue feathers that Liam Walker kept as a pet for reasons he had never satisfactorily explained to anyone, waddled in as if he owned the place, which, considering the last name of the man paying the bills, technically made some sense. The entire kitchen froze. Winston crossed the floor with the specific dignity of someone who doesn't realize he's causing a problem, stopped in front of Mia, and just stared at her with his head slightly tilted. Mia looked down at the duck. Then she looked up at Liam. "Is he a temporary solution too?" "He lives here," Liam said, with the tone of someone who had had this conversation before and hadn't won. Mia crouched down to the duck's level. Winston didn't back away. She reached out her hand slowly, and he tapped his beak against it with the absolute confidence of someone who had decided in 3 seconds that this person was trustworthy. She watched him for a moment. Then she stood up, crossed her arms, and faced Liam with the expression of someone making a quick calculation between dignity and a bank account. "Double my normal day rate," she said. "I decide the menu. Nobody yells in my kitchen, and you introduce me properly to everyone. Deal." "I'm not finished." She pointed at Winston. "He stays out of the kitchen." Liam glanced at the duck. The duck glanced at Liam. "I'll try," he said. "Great start." 10 minutes later, Mia Whitmore was wearing the tallest chef's hat she had ever seen in her life, a white cylinder that made her seem 2 feet taller and had clearly been made for someone with a much larger head than hers. She took a step toward the kitchen and bumped right into the doorframe. The hat tipped to the side. She straightened it calmly. "Well, it could be a fire. There's still time for it to get worse." Winston, who had re-entered the kitchen without anyone noticing, replied, "Quack." Liam stood still for a second, and it was right there, in that specific and completely unromantic moment, that a subtle shift touched his features. It wasn't admiration yet. It was something closer to surprise. The kind of surprise of someone realizing the person standing in front of them wasn't afraid of the chaos. He stepped closer slowly, took the hat carefully, and adjusted it, holding her face lightly to center it. They stood close together for a few seconds. Neither pulled away. Nobody made a comment. "Can you look like a French chef?" he asked quietly. Mia straightened her posture. "I can even look like an astronaut, but you pay extra for humiliation." "World-famous European," he said, turning to the brigade. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Chef Mia." He paused for a fraction of a second. "Dubois, from Lyon. She'll be taking over the kitchen tonight. Those who panic burn the butter. Those who breathe save the dinner." The entire brigade stared at her. She stared back at them. Winston quacked softly near the industrial stove, as if he already knew how this story ended. Mia had learned to cook watching her grandmother in a tiny Brooklyn kitchen. She had never worked in a luxury restaurant. She had never stepped foot in Lyon in her life. But she knew one thing, that Liam Walker, with all his money and all his contracts, was clearly still learning. Chaos has a solution. What has no solution is the person who gives up before trying. "Can someone show me where the pantry is?" she said in a loud, firm voice. 2 sous chefs moved at the same time. Dinner at 7 was still possible. The kitchen doors swung open right when the first pots were already on the stove. A woman walked in, unhurried, wearing the specific smile of someone arriving to confirm a suspicion. Her eyes swept over the brigade, landed on Liam, and then settled on Mia for a few seconds, taking in the worn-out sneakers, the makeshift apron, the slightly crooked hat. Victoria Harlow crossed her arms with calculated elegance. "Since when do French chefs wear sneakers?" Victoria Harlow wasn't the type of person who asked questions without already knowing the answer. She stood at the kitchen entrance, staring at Mia's sneakers with the scientific interest of someone who had found an anomaly in an experiment that should be under control. Liam took a step forward before the silence could turn into a confession. "Lyon is a very practical city," he said, with an impressive conviction for someone making it up in real time. "High-performance chefs prioritize foot comfort. It's almost a culinary philosophy." Victoria turned to him slowly. "A culinary philosophy." "Exactly." She glanced at Mia. Mia straightened her crooked hat and replied in French, or what she hoped sounded like French, which in practice was a mix of old movie Italian and Brooklyn Spanish, saying something about comfort being the foundation of every great kitchen, paired with a vague wave of her hand that seemed to dismiss the question as too obvious to deserve a long explanation. The cooks around them nodded seriously. Victoria didn't nod. But she didn't say anything else either. She spun on her heels and walked out of the kitchen with the smile of someone saving that information for a more convenient moment. Mia let out the breath she had been holding for the last 30 seconds. "Comfort is the foundation of the kitchen?" Liam whispered, walking past her toward the prep counter. "It worked, didn't it?" He didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth did something she hadn't seen until then. The brigade decided, by silent and collective consensus, to test the new chef before respecting anything she said. The first one to move was Marcus, a 28-year-old sous chef who had studied at a culinary school in Chicago and carried the specific posture of someone who knows he should be holding the position currently held by someone else. "Chef de Bois," he said with a formality that bordered on provocation, "what is your opinion on the high heat reduction technique for tonight's main sauce?" The entire kitchen pretended to be doing something else while waiting. Mia glanced at him, lowered her eyes to the pan, and then met Marcus's gaze again with the expression of someone who had understood exactly what was going on. "What is your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus." She stepped up to the pan, picked up the wooden spoon and stirred slowly. She smelled it. Stirred again. High heat burns the sugar before it concentrates the flavor. You'll end up with a sauce that looks pretty on the outside and hollow on the inside. She turned the flame down to medium without asking for permission, just like a person who yells a lot in a meeting but has nothing to say. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. 3 cooks in the back turned away so it wouldn't show they were laughing. "A good recipe teaches," Mia said, handing the spoon back to him. "Ego just gets in the way. Keep going." Marcus kept going. The next problem arrived 20 minutes later, when one of the younger cooks, a guy of maybe 22 named Danny, who was clearly having the worst day of his career, dropped an entire bowl of vanilla cream on the floor and stood staring at the white puddle with the expression of someone seriously considering a career change. Liam opened his mouth from across the kitchen. Mia got there first. "Danny," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "How long does it take to make another one?" 12 minutes. "Chef, do you have 12 minutes? He checked his watch, glanced at the puddle, and then focused back on her. "I do." "Then the problem already has a solution. Go." Danny went. Liam stood exactly where he was, his mouth still slightly open, watching. Mia didn't look his way, but she knew he was there. There was a difference between the silence of a surprised person and the silence of a person paying attention. Liam Walker was paying attention. It was the first time he had truly smiled since she had arrived at that hotel. The golden light coming through the skylights had changed angles by the time Victoria returned. This time she didn't stay at the entrance. She walked in slowly, as if she were merely observing the progress, stopping here and there to inspect a pan or make a comment to a staff member. Winston, who had re-entered the kitchen for the 3rd time that day without anyone being able to explain how, was near the hottest corner of the kitchen doing absolutely nothing with great conviction, until Victoria walked past him. Winston froze completely for 2 seconds. Then he waddled away from her with a haste that required no explanation. Victoria's gaze shifted from the duck to Mia. Her face gave away nothing. Winston's gave away everything. The highest-risk moment of the afternoon arrived when Gerald, a cook with 14 years at the house who had clearly decided the new chef needed a real test, stepped up with a tasting spoon of sauce and asked a question in perfect French about flavor balance. Mia didn't understand a single word, but she didn't blink. She replied in French as well, or in the particular dialect she had invented over the last 40 minutes, which included at least 3 words that absolutely did not exist in any known language, saying that the balance was almost there, but there was one excessive ingredient that needed to be reduced. Gerald stared at the tasting spoon, looked up at her, and then lowered his eyes back to the spoon. "The time." "Exactly," she said with a solemn nod. "The time." Gerald returned to his station, seemingly satisfied. Liam, who had his back turned and was pretending to examine a document, put a hand over his mouth. "That doesn't even exist in French," he whispered, walking past her 2 minutes later. "Neither does my diploma," she replied without stopping her herb chopping. "We're even." By 5:30 in the afternoon, the kitchen had found a rhythm. Not the perfect rhythm of a trained brigade, but the functional rhythm of people who had decided to trust each other because there was no time for any other option. Mia adjusted, suggested, corrected, without yelling, without humiliating, without making anyone feel small. He who yells in the kitchen has already lost the recipe. She had learned that from her grandmother before learning any technique. She didn't notice the exact moment the brigade stopped testing her and started following her. But Liam noticed. He stood near the entrance for an amount of time he couldn't measure himself, watching that woman who had arrived to deliver bread and who had, in a matter of hours, organized the chaos without any ceremony, without asking for recognition, without needing authority to earn respect. He crossed his arms, stared at his own reflection in the nearest copper pot. He thought about how many times he had walked into this kitchen over the past 3 years without knowing the names of half the people working in it. Near one of the side prep counters, 2 cooks exchanged low-voiced comments while finishing their prep work. "She must make in a day what I make in a year," one of them said, without malice, with that resigned admiration of someone comparing universes. Mia was 6 feet away. She didn't react. She kept adjusting the seasoning in the pan in front of her, her face neutral, her hand movements steady. But there was something there she couldn't ignore. They believed in a version of her that didn't exist. The trust they felt wasn't from Mia Whitmore, from the food truck, the daughter of immigrants, who had learned to cook by watching a 70-year-old woman sing in Spanish over a pot of beans. It was for a European chef, invented in 10 seconds, by a man in a suit who hadn't even asked her name first. She stirred the sauce, breathed. "Tuck that away in the place where you keep things that hurt but don't have a scheduled time to surface." Victoria was the last one to leave the kitchen before dinner began. At the door, she stopped and looked at Mia one last time. The hat had slipped slightly to the side. The sleeve of her apron had ridden up with the heat and movement of the last few hours. Victoria saw it. A thin bracelet. Simple, with a small food truck charm. She stared at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she smiled, not at Mia, not at anyone, just to herself, and walked out without saying a word. Dinner was about to begin. And Victoria Harlow had just found exactly what she was looking for. The 7 o'clock dinner wasn't the important dinner. That was the part Mia only found out 40 minutes before the first plates left the kitchen, when Liam showed up at her station wearing the expression of someone about to add a piece of information he should have mentioned earlier. "Tonight's clients are regular guests," he said quietly. "The dinner that matters is Friday." Mia stopped seasoning. "Today is Tuesday." "I know. You hired me for a Tuesday dinner. I hired you for the week." "You didn't say that." "It was implied." "Implied," she repeated with the tone of someone filing that word away to use later. Liam had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, which, on the millionaire CEO expression scale, was equivalent to an ordinary man dropping to his knees to apologize. "The chain's main investor flies in on Friday," he said. "He decides whether to finance the expansion to 8 more cities. Friday's dinner is the dinner that has to be perfect." Mia watched him for 3 seconds. "How much extra?" He named a number. She picked up the spoon and went back to seasoning. Tuesday's dinner was, in high-end culinary technical terms, a creative exercise under extreme pressure. Mia had turned the original menu, which without the executive chef was basically a list of intentions with no execution, into something that worked with what the kitchen had available. No impossible last-minute ingredients. No techniques the brigade hadn't mastered. Honest food, well executed, presented with just enough care to look sophisticated, without needing to pretend to be something else. Marcus, the sous chef who had tested Mia early in the afternoon, was the first to admit it, not with words, but by delivering the plates on time and the right way, which to a cook is the exact same thing. Danny dropped only one thing during the entire service: a napkin. And it was a genuine accident, not from nerves. Winston was found twice near the kitchen entrance, and removed both times by Liam, with a firmness that Winston respected, for approximately 4 minutes each. The guests didn't complain about anything. 2 asked to compliment the chef. Mia stepped out of the kitchen with her hat slightly crooked, said something in made-up French that sounded like a thank you, offered a European nod she had mentally rehearsed during dessert, and slipped back into the kitchen before anyone could ask a question she couldn't answer. "How did it go?" Danny asked when she returned. "They clapped," she said. Taking off the hat? Seriously? 2 of them. She hung the hat on the door hook. Friday we need 6. The kitchen slowly emptied out. Pots washed, counters wiped, lights turned off one by one. Mia was taking off her apron when Liam appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You can come up when you're ready," he said. "3rd floor. I need to talk to you." She glanced at him. About Friday, and about how this is going to work going forward." He headed upstairs without waiting for an answer. Mia stared at the empty doorway for a second. Then she looked at the giant hat hanging on the hook. She grabbed it and went up. Liam Walker was in the 3rd floor hallway with his tie slightly loosened, the only visible sign that it had been an unusual day. When Mia came up the service stairs still wearing her apron, the giant hat dangling from her hand like a trophy she wasn't quite sure she wanted to keep. "We survived," she said. The sauce on the 2nd course was a little salty. Mia stopped, stared at him. "You just said thank you in the weirdest way I've ever heard." Liam opened his office door and gestured for her to enter. Liam Walker's office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking all of Boston. The city sparkled outside with that cold, precise luminosity of someone who doesn't care about what's happening inside the buildings. A dark oak desk occupied the center of the room, covered with documents organized with a symmetry that seemed more like anxiety than a system. On the walls, framed architectural blueprints of the chain's hotels. No family photos, no personal details. Except for Winston, who was sleeping in a little basket in the corner, wearing the serene expression of someone who had had an extremely productive day. Mia glanced at the duck, took in the frames, and finally focused on the desk. "Do you live here, or just work here?" "Both, depending on the week." "That's sad. That's efficiency." "It's also sad." Liam opened a drawer, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the desk with the gesture of someone who had prepared it in advance and was slightly proud of his own organization. "Service agreement," he said. "You stay until the end of the week while we hire a permanent executive chef. Daily compensation, confidentiality regarding tonight's events, and total alignment with the hotel's standards." Mia picked up the document, read the 1st page, flipped to the 2nd, went back to the 1st. "Total alignment with the hotel's standards," she repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the menu follows the guidelines established by management, which is you, which is management. Which is you." Liam adjusted the knot of his already loosened tie, which didn't help at all. "It's a standard clause. It's a clause that says I cook whatever you order me to, without having a say." She set the document back on the desk with a gentleness that was, in practice, the exact opposite of gentleness. "I'm not signing this." What followed was a negotiation that Liam Walker, who had closed contracts with investors from 5 different countries, was not in the least prepared to handle. Mia pulled a pen out of her own jacket, opened the contract to the 2nd page, and began crossing out clauses with the naturalness of someone editing a grocery list. "This one is out," she said, dragging the pen across the menu paragraph. "I decide what goes to the table. You approve the budget, I approve the food." "That's not how it—" "This one is out too," another clause crossed off. "I'm not wearing the official uniform, my apron, my rules." "The uniform is part of the visual identity of the Liam." He stopped. It was the first time she had used his name without any title before it, without formality, without distance. It sounded different than he expected. "I've taken jobs where they promised me respect," she said, her voice low, without drama, like someone reporting a fact. "The respect never came with the paycheck. I won't sign a piece of paper that puts me back in that place before I even start." The office went quiet for a few seconds. Boston sparkled outside, uncaring. Liam stared at the marked-up contract, lifted his eyes to her, and then lowered them back to the paper. Then he picked up his own pen, turned to the 3rd page, and crossed out the clause himself that prevented Mia from suggesting menu changes without prior management approval. "You have a say," he said. "I decide the budget. If there's a conflict, we talk." Mia looked down at the crossed-out section. "That was your first concession. That was an executive decision. It was also your first concession." He didn't reply, but he picked up the document and slid it toward her with the pen resting on top. "Respect doesn't come as a perk." She was about to sign when Winston woke up. No one understood exactly what had caught the duck's attention. Maybe it was the shine of the pen. Maybe it was Winston's natural instinct to show up at the most inconvenient moments of Liam Walker's life. The fact is that he climbed out of the little basket, crossed the office with quick and decisive steps, reached the desk and grabbed the pen. He didn't steal it. He took it, with a calmness that suggested ownership, and he walked away. Winston, Liam said with the tone of someone who had said that name in that exact tone many times before. Winston didn't stop. Winston. The duck reached the window, stopped, looked out at the city, and dropped the pen on the floor as if he had decided it wasn't quite what he was looking for. Mia had her hand over her mouth, trying not to make a sound. Liam went to retrieve the pen, walked back to the desk, placed it in front of her, and said, with a dignity the situation did not deserve, "Sorry." He does that. How often? Often enough that I keep spare pens in 3 different drawers. Mia looked at Winston, who had returned to his basket, and closed his eyes with the expression of someone who had accomplished an important mission. "He tested you before I did." She said, "What?" "He took the pen before I signed." She picked up the document. "I think he wanted to see if you would go get it." Liam stared at the duck for 3 seconds. That is a very generous interpretation of the behavior of an animal that steals pens out of habit. Or it's the right interpretation. She signed. A good contract is one that protects both sides. She folded her own copy of the contract and slipped it into her jacket pocket while Liam organized the documents. The city outside had grown a little darker. The fine drizzle had stopped at some point during dinner without warning. "Do you always negotiate like this?" he asked, without looking at her. "Only when the other side is a billionaire." He closed the folder. "Tomorrow at 8. Meeting with the brigade to plan the week's menu." "At 8:30, she said, grabbing the giant hat from the chair where she had hung it. "At 8 I'm still at the market, picking out ingredients. The hotel has suppliers. The hotel has suppliers that sell to the hotel. I have suppliers that sell to me." She tucked the hat under her arm. "Temperature difference in the tomatoes. You wouldn't notice it, but your clients do." Liam opened his mouth, closed it. Mia walked to the door, opened it, and stopped. "Liam," he looked up. "Thank you for the crossed-out clause." She walked out. The door clicked shut softly. Liam stood still for a moment. Then he looked at Winston. Winston had one eye open. "Don't say anything," Liam said. "Quack," Winston replied. From the hallway, Victoria photographed Mia walking out of the office with the contract copy in her pocket and the giant hat under her arm. She stared at the photo on the screen for a second. Then she sent a message to a nameless number in her contacts and wrote just, "Found what I needed. We talk tomorrow." Friday arrived with the arrogance of a day that knows it's important. The Walker Grand Hotel woke up 2 hours earlier than normal, with the specific noise of people trying to do everything at once without looking like they were doing everything at once. Fresh flowers in the lobby vases, rugs brushed in the right direction. The lounge piano tuned by a man who showed up at 6 in the morning with a small briefcase and the seriousness of a surgeon. Mia arrived at 7 with 3 grocery bags, fresh thyme, and a list in her pocket that she had rewritten 4 times since Wednesday. Liam met her at the service entrance. "Did you sleep?" she asked, looking at his dark circles. "I worked." Same thing with worse results. He grabbed one of the bags without asking permission. She let him, because it was heavy and because sometimes accepting help requires no ceremony. The kitchen in the early hours of Friday was a choreography no one had rehearsed, but that worked because everyone knew exactly what they needed to do. Marcus coordinated the appetizers with a seriousness that had completely replaced his skepticism from Tuesday. Danny had arrived early on his own and was chopping vegetables with a precision that Mia noticed and didn't comment on, because praising out loud at the wrong time embarrasses more than it helps. "Final menu," Mia said, placing the list on the center prep counter for everyone to see. Appetizer, lobster bisque with fresh herb foam. Main course, braised short rib with root vegetable puree and pan sauce reduction. Dessert, upside-down apple tart with vanilla ice cream and caramelized maple. Silence. "That is American," Gerald said, with the tone of someone who was expecting something with a French name he couldn't pronounce. "It is," Mia confirmed. "But sophisticated." Marcus added, studying the list. Both things can coexist, she said. Pretty food impresses. Honest food stays in your memory. She surveyed the brigade. Which of the two do you think an investor who travels the entire world hasn't had yet? Gerald glanced at Marcus. Marcus looked over at Danny. Danny was chopping carrots but clearly listening to everything. Honest food, Gerald said, his voice carrying the tone of someone admitting something he didn't know he believed until that moment. Exactly. Let's get to work. Liam stood near the entrance, in a dark suit, wearing the expression of someone who had arrived to inspect and had stayed to observe. There was something different about watching that kitchen work. Not the controlled noise of a trained brigade following protocol. It was something else. It was a kitchen where people seemed to want to be. He crossed his arms and stayed quiet, which for Liam Walker was the absolute most he could do to not interfere with something that was going well. At 4 p.m, with dinner scheduled for 8, Winston escaped. No one saw the exact moment. The most accepted theory later was that he had taken advantage of the confusion of a last-minute delivery. Boxes coming through the service door divided attention. Winston, with his specific gift for identifying windows of opportunity, and simply waddled into the kitchen as if he had been invited. The first sign was Danny stopping mid-motion and looking down with an expression that wasn't surprise, but inevitable resignation. "Chef," he said, without raising his voice. Mia turned around. Winston was standing in front of the tray of mini chicken and waffles that had been prepared as a welcome canapé, his head tilted at the specific angle of someone calculating the best approach. Mia said. The duck looked at her. "Not even you get to eat before the VIP client." Winston's gaze darted from the waffles to her, then settled back on the tray. The moral dilemma was brief. He took a step toward the tray. "Winston." Mia's voice dropped half an octave. It wasn't a yell. It was worse than a yell. It was the specific tone of someone who isn't going to repeat herself. The duck stopped. He stood motionless for 3 seconds, with the wounded dignity of someone who had been caught making a reasonable attempt. Then he turned and walked away toward the door with a haste that tried to look like indifference, and failed. Liam had walked into the kitchen during the negotiation and was standing there with his tablet in hand, watching the scene. "My duck has terrible timing," he said. "No," Mia said, turning back to the pan. "He just picked the right owner." Liam watched where Winston had walked out, then looked at her, wearing the expression of someone who didn't know whether he had been complimented or provoked, and was reasonably sure it was both. At 6:30, with the kitchen in its final rhythm, Mia was reviewing the plate presentations when she noticed flour on Liam's suit jacket. He had spent part of the afternoon moving between the kitchen and the dining room, and at some point he had leaned against the wrong prep counter. She didn't say anything. She took the clean towel resting on her shoulder and carefully wiped the dark fabric, focused without standing on ceremony. Liam didn't pull back. He stood still. They stood close together for a few seconds without either producing a reason to step away. The kitchen around them remained in motion, pans, voices, the smell of maple caramelizing in the oven, but right there in that specific square foot, the rhythm was different. "Done," she said without looking up. He inspected the jacket, then met her eyes. "Thank you. Don't lean on the flour counter anymore. I'll try. It's the 3rd time today." "I know." She finally looked up. He was looking at her with an expression that wasn't that of the CEO of the Walker Grand Hotel. It was an older expression than that, simpler, the kind people hide underneath everything they build to make it look like they don't need anything. "I spent years trying to make everything perfect," he said, his voice low, without drama, like someone thinking out loud without having planned to. "And I never managed to make this place happy." Mia remained silent. She kept her eyes on him. "Places don't get happy," she said eventually. "People do." Liam opened his mouth, closed it. She went back to the pan. He stood there for 1 second longer than necessary before walking away. Luxury without a soul is just decoration. The Walker Grand Dining Room at 8 at night was the kind of place that made people walk differently. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over tables covered in white linen. The pianist played something soft that no one could identify, but everyone felt they knew. The smell of artisan bread, maple, and braised meat drifted from the kitchen in discreet waves, like an argument being built with patience. The first guests arrived at 8:05. The maître was at the entrance when the movement at the main door shifted its rhythm. He straightened his posture, which was the signal for the nearest waiters to do the same, which was the signal for everyone else. "Mr. Edward Calloway," he announced, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had practiced that specific pitch. Edward Calloway was 72 years old, with white hair, a suit that didn't need a tie to look expensive, and the kind of presence that makes an entire room recalibrate without realizing it. He walked in slowly, scanning the dining room with the attention of someone who had seen many dining rooms and was still deciding what he thought of this one. He stopped for half a second near the wall of the side corridor. He looked down. Winston was there, sitting quietly in the dark, wearing the serene expression of someone who had found a good spot to watch the action. Edward Calloway stared at the duck for 3 full seconds. He didn't call anyone over. He didn't say anything. He just kept walking toward the main table with the exact same pace as before, as if ducks in the corridors of luxury hotels were exactly what he expected to find. Behind him, 6 feet away, Victoria walked in, wearing the smile of someone who had spent the entire week preparing something. Her eyes swept the room, found Liam near the kitchen entrance, traced the direction the smell was coming from, and thought, without saying it to anyone, with the tranquility of someone who is absolutely sure, "It's over for you now." The dinner had reached the 3rd course, and up until that moment, it was exactly the success everyone needed it to be. Edward Calloway had tasted the lobster bisque and made a pause that Liam recognized, from years of negotiating with investors, as the kind of pause that precedes something good. The short rib had been praised by 2 guests loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. The entire room breathed that specific kind of quiet success, silverware clinking with confidence, low and satisfied conversations, the pianist switching to something slightly more upbeat because even he had felt the shift in mood. Mia stood at the back of the dining room, near the kitchen door, watching the reception of the dishes, with her giant hat slightly crooked and her hands folded in front of her apron. It was exactly in that moment of tranquility that Victoria walked across the room. She didn't run. There was no drama in her step, just the quiet determination of someone who had rehearsed that moment in her head several times and was finally reaping the reward. "Chef du Bois," she said, loudly enough for the nearby tables to turn around. Mia turned. "I was curious," Victoria continued, stopping in front of her with the smile she had worn all night. "About one thing." "About what?" "About how a chef trained in Lyon never showed up in any search I did. No photos, no professional record, no mention in any French culinary publication." The surrounding room began to realize something was happening. The conversations dropped in volume. "I'm discreet," Mia said, keeping her voice steady. "You're non-existent," Victoria replied. And before anyone could process the sentence, she reached out and snatched the giant hat off Mia's head. The hat hit the marble floor with a hollow thud that, in that sudden silence, sounded as loud as a breaking plate. The entire dining room froze. Forks paused in the air. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The pianist, who hadn't seen anything but felt the shift in the room, hit a wrong note and stopped playing completely. Mia stood in the center of everyone's stares, her hair slightly messed up by the abrupt removal of the hat, with nowhere to hide. "This woman," Victoria announced, turning to the room with the satisfaction of someone who had waited all night for that moment, "is not a chef. She is not French. She works in a food truck 3 blocks from here. Mr. Walker hired a stranger off the street and lied to all of you about who was cooking the most important dinner of the year." A whisper rippled through the tables like a wave. Edward Calloway didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just watched, his water glass hovering halfway to his mouth, his expression completely unreadable. Liam was on the other side of the room. Mia saw him start to move. But before he got there, she looked down at the hat on the floor. "At least my neck survives now," she said, loudly enough for the closest tables to hear. Someone laughed. It was a short, nervous laugh, immediately muffled, but it was real. Victoria wasn't expecting that. Her expression wavered for a second, the kind of waver that happens when the mental script hasn't predicted a specific reaction. "That doesn't change the fact that you lied," she said, recovering her tone. "No," Mia agreed, "it doesn't." She crouched down, picked the hat up off the floor, and held it with both hands, looking at the entire room at once. "My name is Mia Whitmore. I own a food truck 3 blocks from here. I learned to cook for my grandmother, in a tiny Brooklyn kitchen, watching her turn beans and rice into something that made the whole family stop to eat together." She paused, not for effect, because the truth, when spoken without disguise, needs room to be heard. "I'm not a famous chef. I just know how to take care of people with food." The dining room fell completely silent. Liam reached her side right then, stopping next to her, letting the silence stretch for a moment. He just stood there, visibly beside her, which in that context was worth more than any sentence. "It's not her fault," he said finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It was my decision to introduce her as someone else. My executive chef walked out of the kitchen hours before the dinner. She showed up to make a delivery and ended up saving the entire night. I lied about who she was because I was afraid the truth wouldn't be enough." He looked around the room. "The food you ate tonight is real. Her talent is real. The only lie was mine." Edward Calloway slowly placed his water glass on the table, the sound of the crystal touching the tablecloth, the only noise in the entire room. Every eye turned to him. "I should have bought a smaller hat," Liam whispered to Mia, barely moving his lips in a desperate effort to ease the tension. "You should have bought honesty," she whispered back. Despite everything, the corner of Liam's mouth twitched. Edward Calloway stood up. The chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to last longer than it should. The entire dining room held its breath. Staff near the kitchen, guests at the tables, Victoria standing in the center of the space she had created, wearing the expression of someone who still believed she had won. Mia held the hat with both hands. Liam stood next to her, shoulder to shoulder, refusing to let her face it alone. Edward Calloway opened his mouth, and what he said next would completely change the course of that night, for everyone in the room. Edward Calloway took far too long to speak. Long enough for Victoria to smile again, certain of the outcome. Long enough for Liam to feel the weight of every second, like a sentence being read in slow motion. "In 60 years of my career," Edward said finally, with the calm voice of someone who never needed to raise his tone to be heard, "I have dined with internationally renowned chefs, in restaurants with enough stars to form a constellation." He paused, looking directly at Mia. "None of them made me feel that the food had a person behind it. Tonight, I felt it." He turned to Victoria. "As for you, Miss Harlow, I suggest reconsidering where you invest your talent for investigation. It would be more useful anywhere that isn't sabotaging other people's work." Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time that night, she didn't have a ready answer. Edward sat back down. "Now, if you'll excuse me," he said, picking up his fork again, "there is still dessert." The dining room let out the breath it had been holding collectively for minutes. Conversations returned slowly, low at first, then looser. The pianist, relieved, resumed the music exactly where he had stopped. Mia stood still for a second, still holding the hat, not knowing if that had really ended well. Liam looked down at her. "I think we survived again," he said quietly. The kitchen, 2 hours later, was a completely different territory from the organized chaos of the early evening. The service had ended. The guests had left satisfied, several stopping to compliment Mia personally, without a hat, without a made-up accent, just as herself. The brigade had cleaned the main stations and gone home, exhausted and strangely proud. Only Liam and Mia remained, finishing up the last details under dimmed lights, the smell of freshly baked bread still lingering in the air like a good memory that didn't want to leave. "You don't have to stay," Mia said, putting a platter away in the high cabinet. "Neither do you. I work here. Technically. I own this place. Technically, I also have to be somewhere." She laughed, a short and genuine sound, and kept organizing. Liam grabbed a towel and started drying utensils without her asking. Mia watched him do it. A man in a suit, still formal even after an entire night, drying spoons as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You've never done this before, have you?" she asked, Drying spoons? Staying in the kitchen after hours, for no work-related reason. He paused for a second, thinking. No, he admitted. Normally, I'd already have gone to the office to handle something that could wait until tomorrow. And today? Today, I couldn't think of anything more important than this. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence two people share when they no longer need to fill every space with words. Can I ask you something? Mia said, after a while, putting away the last plate. You can. Why do you run a hotel that clearly doesn't make you happy? Liam stood still with the spoon in his hand, looking at her. My father built this from nothing, he said finally. Every hotel in the chain, every decision. I grew up hearing that one day it would all be mine, and that being an owner meant never letting anything drop. He placed the spoon in the drawer. The more money I made, the more interested people showed up, and the fewer friends were left. Mia stopped what she was doing. That's sad. That's wealth management. That's also sad. He laughed, low, with no real humor. I know. Do you have anyone you trust? She asked. Truly. Not an employee, not an investor, not a journalist looking for an interview. Liam thought about it. The silence lasted long enough that the answer was already clear before he even said anything. I have a duck, he said eventually. Mia really laughed this time, the kind of laugh that escapes before a person can control it. That explains a lot. He doesn't judge, he doesn't ask for anything. He just shows up when I least expect it and messes everything up. Sounds like someone I know, she said, looking directly at him. Liam didn't look away. You don't have to look strong all the time, she said, her voice softer. I know. But you do it anyway. Loneliness wears a suit too, he said, and the sentence came out more honest than he had planned, the kind of truth that slips out when the guard is down. They were closer to each other than they had realized. The kitchen prep counter between them had ceased to be a barrier at some point during the conversation. Mia looked at him. Liam looked at her. The smell of freshly baked bread, the dimmed lights, the silence of the empty kitchen after an entire night of chaos, everything conspired toward a moment that both felt coming without needing to name it. He leaned in a little. She didn't pull back. The distance between them closed slowly, with the careful hesitation of someone crossing a line they know they won't be able to cross back over later. A few inches away, their breath almost shared. A flapping of wings cut the air between them. Winston landed right in the middle of the prep counter, between the two of them, with the precision of a duck that had clearly chosen that exact moment on purpose. Quack, he said, looking at them alternately. Mia pulled back first, bringing her hand to her mouth to hide her laugh. Liam stood still, looking at the duck with an expression that mixed disbelief and a genuine desire to discuss life priorities with an animal. Your duck has emotional radar, Mia said, still laughing. He has a specific talent for ruining the best moments of my life, Liam said, carefully lifting Winston off the counter. Winston quacked again, pleased with himself, and waddled across the kitchen as if he had just accomplished an important mission. The tension had broken, but it hadn't disappeared. It had just changed shape, turned into something they would both carry home that night without needing to say out loud. Across town, in an office with a far less generous view than Liam's, Victoria Harlow was sitting in front of her computer when her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. The words on the screen made her smile slowly, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with newly discovered power. The night had been a defeat, but what had just reached her was enough information to destroy Liam Walker in a way that no hat snatched off in public ever could. Liam's phone started vibrating at 6 in the morning on Saturday and didn't stop. He was still in his pajamas, coffee in hand, when he opened the notification that had generated the 10th missed call in 15 minutes. The headline took up the entire screen of his phone before he could even process the words. Scandal at the Walker Grand. Investigation reveals fraudulent chef and CEO in credibility crisis. He slammed his mug onto the table with enough force that the coffee splashed out. Mia arrived at the hotel office at 7:30, still wearing her apron over her clothes, after receiving a text from Liam that contained exactly 4 words. I need you here. The door was open. Liam was sitting behind the desk, 3 computer screens lit up at the same time, his face carrying the specific paleness of someone who had read the same news story many times, hoping it would change. "What happened?" she asked, walking in. He turned the main laptop so she could see it. The review had been published at 11 the night before, less than an hour after dinner ended, signed by a food columnist known for destroying reputations just as easily as she praised them. The text was long, detailed, and carefully cruel, calling Mia a fraud hired in a rush, accusing Liam of deceiving investors and clients, and ending by suggesting that the company's board should reconsider his leadership. Mia read in silence. When she finished, she looked at Liam. "This wasn't written last night." "What?" "Nobody writes a piece this long with this structure in less than an hour." She scrolled back to the top. "This was prepared beforehand. It was ready before the dinner was even over." Liam stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I've written menu descriptions under pressure. This right here," she pointed at the screen, "doesn't have the rush of someone racing against the clock. It has the care of someone who had time to plan every sentence." The stock market opened at 9:30, and in 20 minutes the Walker Group shares dropped 8%. Liam stood up, sat down, got up again, pacing the office as if the movement could solve something that clearly had nothing to do with physical movement. "I'm going to call the legal department," he said. "To do what?" "Sue the columnist. Sue whoever leaked this. And what does that solve? It shows we're not going to take this quietly. It shows you're desperate," Mia said bluntly. "And desperate people make mistakes that give ammunition to the people attacking them." Liam stopped pacing. "So what do you suggest?" "That we read carefully instead of reacting with anger." He took a deep breath, sat back down in his chair, and pushed the laptop toward her. "All yours." The heavy rain that had started during the early morning hours beat against the office windows while the two of them read the text line by line, pausing, going back, comparing dates and names. The coffee Liam had brought cooled completely on the desk without either of them noticing. "Right here," Mia said after 40 minutes, stopping the cursor over a specific section. The columnist quotes an anonymous source saying the executive chef received a payment to abandon the kitchen. That's true. The chef was bribed, yes, but look at the date she uses. Mia zoomed in on the screen. She says the payment happened on Thursday morning, but the chef only walked out on Friday right at dinner time. Liam leaned closer to the screen. "You're right. Liars usually forget the details," Mia said. She knew too much about something that happened too fast. That means she had the information before anything actually happened. Liam kept his eyes on her, something between admiration and surprise forming in his expression. "You investigate better than my lawyers." "They charge by the hour," Mia said without taking her eyes off the screen. "I charge by stubbornness." They spent the next 3 hours scouring public bank records, cross-referencing times of messages sent to the press, and piecing together information that Liam didn't even know existed, until Mia showed him where to look. "How do you know how to do this?" he asked at one point, watching her navigate a commercial transaction with an ease that seemed far too familiar for someone from a food truck. "When you run a small business by yourself, you learn to verify everything. Suppliers who overcharge, clients who don't pay, people who promise a contract and disappear." She didn't look away from the screen. "Nobody is going to do it for you, so you learn." Liam stayed quiet for a second, watching her with an attention that had nothing to do with the problem on the screen. "Found it," she said suddenly, sitting up straighter. "What?" "Bank transfer, Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. An amount matching what your old chef received." She pointed at the name on the originating account. "And look who signed the document." Liam leaned in, read the name. He froze completely. "That can't be a coincidence," he said after a long silence. "It's not." Mia saved the screen, copied the document, and looked at him. "The truth takes time, but it arrives." Liam ran a hand over his face, processing it. "She writes like someone who seasons a salad with resentment," Mia said, looking back at the published review, in a deliberate attempt to lighten the weight of the moment. All bitter, no balance, and yet she expects someone to ask for seconds. Liam laughed, a short and tired sound, but he laughed. "You have a strange talent for making jokes at the worst times." "It's a gift," she said. "Do you want me to stop?" "No," he said, looking at her with a sincerity that no longer had anything to do with the scandal on the screen. Please don't stop. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when the document was completely organized. Dates, amounts, signature, everything cross-referenced and proven. Enough proof that the sabotage had been planned before the dinner even started. This will destroy whoever did this, Liam said, staring at the saved file. It will, Mia agreed. But not today. Why not? Because revealing it now, in the middle of a panic, looks like desperation. She carefully closed the laptop. When the right time comes, this is worth more than any lawsuit. Liam looked at her with the expression of someone completely reconsidering what he thought he knew about strategy and patience. That was the moment Mia's cell phone vibrated on the desk. She looked down at the screen. An unknown number, with a short message. I know you found something. Be careful what you do with it. Mia stood still, staring at the message. Across town, someone already knew exactly what they had discovered that morning. The message was still on Mia's phone screen when Liam made the wrong decision. I'm going to hire a private security team, he said, already dialing a number. And I'll have the legal department track down this contact today, whatever it costs, Liam. I'll offer a reward for any information about who sent this. He stopped, phone still in hand, and looked at her. We agreed to save the proof for the right moment, Mia said, slowly. Now you want to solve this with money and threats before even thinking about it. Someone is threatening you because of me. What do you expect me to do? I expect you to trust the plan we made together this morning. Liam stood still, phone still in hand, his thumb hovering over the call button. I hate feeling like I'm doing nothing, he said finally, his voice lower. You're not doing nothing, you're waiting for the right time. Mia stepped closer, gently took the phone from his hand and placed it on the desk. It's different. It looks the exact same as when someone is threatening you. I know. She looked at him. But if you react now with money and threats, it's going to look exactly like what the review said you are. Someone who uses power to silence a problem instead of solving it. Liam remained silent, looking at the phone on the desk. What if the proof isn't enough? It will be. Mia picked up the giant hat, which was still hanging near the door since the night of the dinner, and placed it back on his head with an almost playful gesture. I think your French chef is still employed. She just needs the boss to trust her for a few more days. Liam looked at her from under the brim of the crooked hat. You always make jokes at the wrong time. I make jokes at the right time. You're the one who hasn't noticed the difference yet. He laughed, low, the kind of laugh that escapes when tension finally finds a way out. Fine, he said, taking the hat off his own head and handing it back to her. No private security, no reward, no lawyers calling anyone today. None of that. But if this person sends another message, you tell me, and we decide together. Mia put that back on the hook near the door. Not alone, together. Liam looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Together, he repeated, as if he were testing the word. It's a strange word for you, I know. It's a word I haven't used in a long time. Winston chose that exact moment to walk into the office, without anyone opening the door, a talent he had perfected without anyone discovering the method, and went straight to Liam's phone on the desk, sniffing the device with deep professional interest. No. Liam and Mia said at the same time. Winston stopped, looked at the two of them, and decided, with the dignity of someone who never had that intention anyway, to sit quietly next to the chair. Mia laughed. He knows when the room needs comic relief. He knows when he's going to get something for free. Those are different things. The late afternoon sun came through the window at a low angle, painting the office in burnt orange. The computer screen still showed the review, the falling numbers, the document of proof the two of them had found together that morning. So the plan continues, Liam said. The plan continues. Mia picked up the bag she had left on the chair. I need to get back to the food truck before my customers think I was kidnapped by a luxury hotel. Technically, that's almost what happened. Technically, I was the one who saved the luxury hotel. Details matter. She walked to the door, stopped, and looked back. Liam? He looked up. Thank you for listening. She left, and the office fell silent again, but it was a different silence than the one that had threatened to settle in minutes before. Liam looked at the hat hanging near the door, then at the saved document on the screen. He picked up the phone, not to call the legal department, but to save the unknown number in a separate file, waiting for the right moment. That was when a new message arrived. Not on Mia's phone this time. On his. Liam opened it, and what was written there made it clear that the person behind all this knew much more about the Walker Grand Hotel than any of them had imagined. The message was still open on Liam's phone screen when he realized he no longer had the patience to keep a secret. He reread the words a second time, a third. Then he closed the app, dropped the phone on the desk, and made a decision that had nothing to do with investigation or proof. It had to do with no longer hiding things. The board meeting had been scheduled for 9 a.m. on Monday, originally to discuss the damage from the review and the crisis containment plan. Liam walked into the 20th floor conference room wearing his usual suit, his usual posture, and stopped in front of the oval table where 7 board members were already seated with expressions that varied between concern and thinly veiled judgment. "Before we begin," he said, taking off his jacket and hanging it on his chair, "I need to say a few things." One of the board members, a gray-haired man named Robert Hayes, who had worked with Liam's father since the days of the chain's first hotel, raised an eyebrow. "We're listening." Liam loosened his tie knot. He didn't take it off yet. Just loosened it, like someone preparing for something. The review published on Saturday contains true information mixed with carefully planted lies. He placed both hands on the table. "But before talking about who did this, I need to admit my part. I hired a chef with no formal credentials and introduced her as someone else because I was afraid the truth wouldn't be enough to impress the most important investor of the year." The room fell silent. "That was a mistake. Not because she didn't know how to cook," he continued, "but because I didn't trust the truth enough to let her be who she really is." Robert Hayes crossed his arms. "Liam, this is an admission of poor judgment in front of the entire board." "Yes, you know what this could mean for your position here." "I do." Liam took off his tie completely, folded it carefully, and placed it on the table in front of him, like someone shedding armor that no longer served any purpose. "And I also know that my company has been built on appearances for far too long. I want it built on truth from here on out, even if that comes at a high cost." A different silence settled over the room, not the silence of judgment, but the silence of people reconsidering something. "There is proof," Liam continued, "that this review was planned before the dinner even took place, by someone who purposely sabotaged our executive chef. We will present that proof at the right time, with the right strategy. But I'm not going to wait to admit that part of the blame is also mine." Robert Hayes kept his eyes on him for a long moment. "Your father never would have said that in a room like this." "I know," Liam said. "Maybe that's why I needed to say it." The meeting ended 40 minutes later, with no definitive decision on Liam's future at the company, but with something he hadn't expected to earn: genuine respect from people who, up until that morning, only knew the version of him that wore a full suit and never admitted to any mistakes. He walked out of the building without his jacket, without his tie, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow, walking through the streets of Boston with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Night fell cold and clear, the kind of early autumn cold that makes the steam of your breath visible in the air. Liam walked 3 blocks on foot, without calling a driver, without telling anyone, until he found the familiar light of Mia's food truck parked on its usual corner. The smell reached him before the sight: burgers grilling, onions caramelizing, something sweet baking in the background. Mia was behind the counter, helping a customer, her hair tied back in a practical way that had nothing to do with the giant hotel hat. She saw Liam approaching and stopped mid-motion. "You're not wearing a suit," she said when he finally got close enough to talk. "I came without a suit," he said. "Just the truth." Mia finished helping the customer, handed over the order, and only then turned to him completely, crossing her arms on the counter. "Go on. I told the board everything this morning, about the French chef lie, about the mistake of not trusting the truth from the beginning." He paused, organizing his words. "And I came here because I realized something." "What?" That I didn't come looking for an improvised chef who saved my dinner. His voice dropped, more honest than anything she had ever heard from him. I came looking for the woman who made me realize I was running an entire empire without actually living inside it. Mia remained silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on him, processing. "You look more handsome without a tie," she said, finally, with a half-smile that tried to hide how much his sentence had affected her. "Is that a yes?" "That is a style observation." She stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "You still haven't told me what you came to ask for." "I didn't come to ask for anything." Liam took a step closer. "I came to tell you." "Tell me what?" He reached out his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. She didn't pull back. His fingers closed around her hand, the first time they had touched like that, without a hat, without a kitchen, without the urgency of a crisis. Just the two of them standing on the cold sidewalk, their breath turning to steam between them. "That I finally understood what you meant," Liam said, "about not mistaking silence for love." That was the moment Winston, who had infiltrated the food truck during this entire conversation without anyone noticing, appeared in the service window carrying an entire loaf of bread in his beak, wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had scored the best deal of the night. "Winston," Mia said, letting go of Liam's hand just to chase after the duck. Liam stood still for a second, watching her chase his own duck through the cramped kitchen of the truck, laughing in a way he couldn't remember the last time he had laughed either. "He does that," Liam said, still standing outside. "I noticed. Always at the worst times or the best," Mia said, finally recovering the bread from the duck's grip and returning to him, breathless and still smiling. "Depends on how you look at it." She stood in front of him, the squished bread in her hand, her hair slightly messed up from the chase. "Now you found me," she said. "I have. And what does that mean?" Liam opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked, hesitated, and decided to ignore it. It vibrated again, and one more time. Mia raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you should answer that." Liam took the phone out of his pocket with visible reluctance and looked at the screen. His expression completely changed. "It's about the meeting with the investors," he said slowly, looking at her. "They scheduled it for this Friday. Edward Calloway wants a definitive answer on the investment." Mia stood still, the smile slowly disappearing from her face. "And the proof we found?" "It's going to need to be ready by then," Liam said, putting the phone away. "This might be the only chance we have to show the truth before Victoria tries anything else." The 20th floor hall was packed like Liam had never seen before. Investors, board members, hand-picked journalists, all seated in rows in front of a makeshift stage where a giant screen displayed the Walker Group's quarterly numbers. The lights were white and direct, the kind that don't forgive nervousness. Edward Calloway was in the front row, impeccable suit, expression as calm as ever. Mia was backstage, behind a side curtain, adjusting the dress she had chosen for the occasion, feeling her heart beat faster than it should for someone who only needed to deliver an envelope at the right moment. "Are you ready?" Liam asked, appearing next to her. "I faced a burning kitchen wearing a hat bigger than my head. I think I can hold an envelope. This envelope could end someone's career." "I know." She squeezed his hand quickly, a fast gesture of shared courage. "But it's the right career to end." The presentation started at 10 o'clock sharp. Liam walked onto the stage wearing his usual suit, but something about his posture had changed since the board meeting. Less rigidity, more presence. "Thank you for being here," he began, looking out at the room. "I know many of you came after reading harsh reviews about my management. I'll be direct. Some of those criticisms are right. I made mistakes, but we also discovered something that needs to be said before we continue." A murmur rippled through the rows. That was the moment Victoria Harlow, who was sitting in the third row with a prepared smile, stood up. "Before you continue, Mr. Walker, perhaps it would be interesting for the investors to know that the truth you promise is just another attempt to manipulate the narrative." The room turned to her. "I have documents," Victoria continued, walking into the center aisle with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed that moment dozens of times. "That prove the hiring of this supposed chef was a deliberate fraud from the beginning, planned specifically to deceive the people in this very room. Liam stood still on the stage. Mia, behind the curtain, felt her stomach tighten. "And I have more," Victoria said, raising her voice, moving closer to a dessert cart that had been positioned near the entrance for the cocktail hour after the presentation. "I have proof that Mr. Walker knew exactly what he was doing." She reached into her bag for something, and in that abrupt movement, she bumped into the cart. The entire cart tipped over. The sound was catastrophic, plates breaking, glasses shattering, an entire pie sliding across the marble floor in slow motion in front of 50 people in expensive suits. And it was exactly in that instant, in the middle of the crash and the chaos, that Winston, who had somehow infiltrated the room in a way no one would ever be able to explain, took off. The duck ran down the center aisle, wings spread, quacking with a dramatic urgency completely disproportionate to the situation, bolted right past the feet of 3 investors, knocked over an empty chair, and stopped, panting and triumphant, right in front of Edward Calloway, holding a mini waffle in his beak that he had stolen somewhere in the confusion. The entire room burst into laughter. Edward Calloway looked at the duck. The duck looked at Edward Calloway, still chewing the waffle with the absolute satisfaction of someone who had scored the most important prize of the morning. "Winston," Edward said slowly with a smile no one expected to see on that always controlled face. The entire room stopped laughing and looked at him, confused. "Do you know him?" asked an investor from the second row. "I've known this duck since he was 2 weeks old," Edward said, still looking at Winston with genuine affection. "I was the one who gave him to Mr. Walker as a gift a few years ago when he became CEO. I told him every executive needs something unpredictable in life, something he can't control with any spreadsheet." Soft laughter rippled through the room. "And I was right." Edward stood up, adjusting his jacket. "This duck is the most authentic thing in this entire company. He never pretends to be what he isn't." He turned to Victoria, who was standing in the middle of the aisle, still holding her bag, completely speechless for the first time all morning. "Different, it seems, from some employees," Edward continued. "Miss Harlow, I received a call last night from an acquaintance of mine in the legal sector, asking about a strange bank transfer that came out of an account linked to your family. Coincidentally, the exact date and the exact amount paid to bribe the Walker Grand's former executive chef." The entire room held its breath. Victoria started. "I'm sure," Edward interrupted, calmly, "that Mr. Walker has documentation confirming this." Liam looked at the side curtain. Mia stepped out from behind it, walked across the stage with steady steps, and handed the envelope directly into Liam's hands. "I do," he said, opening the envelope in front of everyone. "Date, amount, originating account, signature. All on record." Victoria took a step back, looking around the crowded room, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that there was no elegant way out of that situation anymore. "A company grows with money," Liam said, looking directly at her, his voice firm but without anger. "A legacy grows with people. You tried to destroy both, thinking you were teaching me a lesson. You only taught me who I can truly trust." 2 hotel security guards, called discreetly minutes before, appeared at the sides of the room. Victoria didn't wait to be escorted. She turned around herself and left, without saying another word, her high heels echoing in a silence that was far more embarrassing than any applause. Liam stood on the stage, the envelope still in his hands, taking a deep breath for the first time in minutes. Edward Calloway slowly bent down, a surprisingly agile movement for a 72-year-old man, and picked Winston up in his arms, petting his feathers with the familiarity of an old friendship. "Your best investment was always this duck," he said, looking at Liam with a gleam of genuine amusement in his eyes. "He never lied to you, not even once." The room laughed again, lighter this time, the kind of laugh that signals the tension had finally passed. Mia, still next to Liam on the stage, watched Winston being pampered by the most important investor in the country. "I think he just got a promotion," she whispered. "He was always the most valuable employee in this company," Liam replied quietly, unable to hold back his smile. No one just had the courage to admit it. Edward Calloway set Winston back on the floor, the duck waddling off satisfied toward the remains of the dropped pie, and turned to the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I have just witnessed more true transparency in this room than in any investor meeting over the last 20 years. I am ready to sign the investment contract today." Applause erupted through the room. Camera flashes went off from every direction, capturing Liam holding hands with Mia on stage, Winston eating pie on the floor, and Edward Calloway smiling like a man who had just witnessed something rare. Mia held Liam's hand tightly through all the chaos, feeling his heart racing through his pulse, realizing that grip meant more than support. It meant that, finally, they were both on the same side, with nothing hidden between them. After the room began to empty out, with investors congratulating Liam one by one and journalists writing furiously, he discreetly pulled Mia aside, near the curtain where everything had started that morning. "I need to tell you something," he said, quietly. "More revelations? I think we've had enough for one morning. It's not about Victoria." He looked at her, seriously, but with something hidden in the corners of his eyes that looked almost like nervousness. "It's about something I've been planning for a few days. Liam, I can't tell you right now." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't match the seriousness from minutes ago at all. "But I promise you'll find out soon." The surprise Liam had promised arrived 3 days later, in the form of a short message. "Tonight, hotel rooftop. Wear something you like, not something formal." Mia arrived at the Walker Grand Terrace wearing a simple dress, her hair down, not knowing exactly what to expect. The city lights spread out below like a carpet of golden dots, and a small band played something soft near the corner, with violin and acoustic guitar, far enough away not to interrupt any conversation. Liam was in the center of the terrace, not wearing a full suit this time. Just a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, exactly how she had met the best version of him. "You said to come informal," she said, walking up. "This looks pretty formal to me." "The clothes are informal. The reason is serious." He held an envelope in his hands, and for a second Mia felt her stomach tighten, remembering the envelope she had handed him days earlier, full of proof and accusations. "It's not that," he said, noticing her expression. "I promise." He opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, with pen scribbles and crossed-out clauses. The original contract. The first one, from the first night, with her notes still visible in the margins. "You kept this?" "You kept it too. I saw it in your bag last week." Mia smiled, unable to deny it. Liam held the paper with both hands and slowly tore it in half. "This contract said you would stay until the end of the week," he said, putting the torn pieces together. "That I decided the budget and you decided the food. That it was temporary. It was a good contract for what it was. I want to offer you another one." He got down on one knee, and the sound of the band seemed to naturally quiet down, as if the musicians themselves had realized what was happening. "This one has no time limit, no exit clause, and definitely no part where I decide anything by myself." Mia brought her hand to her mouth. "Liam, do you want to sign my last contract?" He opened a small box, revealing a simple, elegant ring, without any exaggeration. "This time, it's for life." Tears began to run down her face before she could even form an answer. She looked at the ring, at him, at the entire lit-up terrace, at the city that had witnessed every crazy moment of that unforgettable week. "Is there a clause against jealous ducks?" she asked between tears and laughter, in a desperate attempt not to completely fall apart. "He signed as a witness," Liam said, pointing to the side. Mia looked. Winston was sitting next to the violinist, wearing a small golden bow tie around his neck that someone, probably the hotel staff in full collusion with Liam, had put on him especially for the occasion. He quacked, satisfied, as if he were officially approving the ceremony. Mia laughed, tears still falling, and finally managed to say the only word that mattered. "Yes." Liam stood up, placed the ring on her finger with hands that trembled slightly, despite all the confidence he had displayed his entire life in boardrooms, and pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than any applause from an investor ever had. "I almost lost you out of pride," he said quietly, just for her to hear. "I won't make that mistake again." "You won't have to," Mia said, resting her forehead against his. "We'll make other mistakes. just not that one. Behind them, Winston decided that was the perfect moment to try and steal the golden bow tie off his own neck, creating a small, comical scene that made them both laugh in the middle of the most important hug of their lives. A few months later, the Walker Grand Hotel garden was decorated with white flowers and golden lights hanging between the trees, the soft sound of a nearby fountain mixing with the acoustic music playing quietly as the guests took their seats. Mia wore a simple dress, no exaggerations, exactly the way she had asked for. Liam waited at the makeshift altar, not wearing a tie, because she had made it very clear, weeks before, that that detail was non-negotiable. Winston, officially designated as the ring-bearer, wore a miniature chef's hat and a blue bow tie, walking down the aisle between the chairs with the solemnity of someone who perfectly understood the importance of his own job. Until he decided he didn't understand anything anymore and took off running with one of the rings in his beak. Liam took off after him through the middle of the garden, still wearing his suit jacket, chasing a duck zigzagging between the guests' chairs, while the entire audience laughed uncontrollably. Mia laughed so hard she could barely stand, holding her bouquet with both hands so she wouldn't drop it. When he finally recovered the ring, after a delicate negotiation involving a piece of bread hidden in his pocket, a precaution he had learned to take since the first week, Liam returned to the altar panting, adjusting his jacket, completely out of dignity and completely happy. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "I told you it can always get worse," Mia replied, still laughing, repeating the phrase she had said on the chaotic first night in that kitchen so long ago. The vows were simple. No grand speeches, no impossible promises. Just two people promising to keep choosing the truth, every day, even when it was easier to hide. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Liam held her face with both hands, exactly as he had done on that first afternoon with the giant hat, and kissed her in front of everyone, silently promising never to hide what he felt behind titles or contracts again. Before the reception, the two walked alone to a corner 3 blocks away, where a refurbished food truck was parked in the exact same spot where everything had started. Mia stood in front of it, looking at the fresh paint, the gold name on the side, Whitmore and Walker Kitchen. "It was right here," she said quietly. "Right on this piece of sidewalk. I know. I had no idea that delivering bread was going to change everything." Liam held her hand. "Thank you for never giving up. Not on cooking, and not on me." She rested her head on his shoulder, looking at the truck that had been the beginning of everything. Months later, on a sunny spring morning, the Walker and Whitmore Culinary Academy opened its doors for the first time. A free school for youth from underprivileged communities in Boston, funded by the success of the hotel and the franchise that Mia's old food truck had become. On the main wall of the entrance, carefully framed, hung the giant chef's hat, exactly as it had fallen on the dining room floor that night of humiliation that turned into a beginning. Below it, a small plaque read, "Cooking feeds the body. Welcoming feeds the life." Liam looked at Mia, who was greeting the first students with the exact same enthusiasm she had brought to that burning kitchen so long ago. "Do you promise you'll never wear that hat again?" he asked, stepping closer. "Only if you promise you'll never hire an imaginary French chef again." Winston, sitting near the entrance wearing his own mini chef's hat, let out a satisfied quack, as if he were officially approving the agreement. In the end, the duck was right. We just needed to stop pretending. And so ends the story of Liam and Mia, a millionaire CEO who learned that truth is worth more than appearance, a food truck chef who never needed a hat to show who she was, and a duck who, in his own way, brought them together before they even realized it. What did you think of this journey through pots, torn contracts, and a completely out-of-control duck? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what grade would you give this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to receive more emotional stories like this one. See you next time.